Ancient Egypt wasn't just pyramids and gold. It was also full of sexual secrets, so weird and shocking. Even their own priests whispered them in fear. Royal families marrying sisters, men having sex with the dead bodies of young women, people having sex in public at crowded festivals, dark magic, using body parts, and a final act so strange it stayed hidden for thousands of years. Why did they do all this? What did these shocking acts really mean? And what royal secret was so strange that it still makes people gasp today? You might think you know ancient Egypt, the pyramids, the mummies, and the pharaohs in golden masks. But history is like an old book, and sometimes the darkest pages get stuck together. People like to remember the glory, the battles, and the art. They don't want to see the strange and scary parts that make us squirm. But the truth is, their world had shadows and secrets too, hidden acts so shocking they were barely whispered. This isn't the Egypt you learned about in school. It's a journey into a world of magic, strange beliefs, and customs that might make you uncomfortable. The world of ancient Egypt was very different from ours. To see why they did such strange things, we have to look through their eyes. Life there was tied to the great river, the Nile. It wasn't just water. It was life itself. Each year the flood brought food, rich soil, and hope. Without it, everyone would starve. So the river became a god, and every part of life was shaped by keeping this god happy. They saw life and death as part of a great cycle. Like the Nile's rise and fall, sex wasn't just for fun. It was a powerful act that kept the world turning. Having children wasn't just a family wish. It helped the gods keep order in the universe. The more children you had, the better you were helping the gods. The gods themselves were messy. They had fights, love affairs, and strange children. Some had sex with humans, or even animals. Egyptians believed copying the gods' acts could give them special power. That led to customs that seem shocking today. In sacred fertility rituals, priests and priestesses would act out these stories inside temples. People gathered to watch, hoping it would bless their fields and families. Music, dancing, and prayers filled the air, all meant to bring new life. The priests, who knew the old myths, made sure each step pleased the gods. The Nile itself felt alive to them. Each flood was like the river having a baby, leaving black mud that made crops grow. To thank this living god, people held festivals by the water with songs, dances, and offerings. But it wasn't all joy. People feared that if the river god got angry, the flood would fail and bring famine. So they followed every rule and ritual, even the strange ones, believing their survival depended on it. Yet some acts crossed the line. Even priests whispered about them in fear. Rituals so dark and shocking they were barely spoken of. The pharaohs, they were not just kings. People saw them as living gods on earth. This meant they were special, more so than anyone else. They had to keep their bloodline pure, like gold that was never mixed with other metals. So what did they do? They married their own sisters, and sometimes even their daughters. It sounds crazy to us now, and it was pretty shocking even back then. But they believed it was the only way to keep the divine magic of their family from getting watered down. If a pharaoh married a common person, their children wouldn't be as godlike, and that was a big no-no. They thought they had to be like the gods themselves, who often had children with their own siblings. The myth of Osiris and Isis, who were brother and sister and also husband and wife, was a big inspiration for this. The royal family felt they were above the rules of regular people. They thought they were a different kind of being, a mix of human and god, and that their blood carried the power of the sun god Ra. To mix this special blood with someone who didn't have it would be a terrible mistake, one that could weaken the whole kingdom. So marrying a sister or a daughter wasn't seen as a bad thing. It was seen as a duty. The average Egyptian person, watching their pharaoh marry his sister, would not have been shocked. They would have seen it as a necessary and holy act, one that ensured the continuation of the divine family and the stability of the kingdom. They would have believed it was the only way to keep the pharaoh's connection to the god strong and pure. A famous example is King Tutankhamun. You know him from his amazing gold mask. But his family tree was a real mess. His parents were brother and sister. His father was Akhenaten, and his mother was one of Akhenaten's sisters. Because of all this inbreeding, Tutankhamun had a bunch of health problems. He had a club foot and a curved spine. Scientists think this was all because his parents were too closely related. He wasn't the only one. Cleopatra VII, the famous queen, also came from a long line of brothers and sisters marrying each other. It was a royal tradition, a way to hold on to power and keep the family line pure. The Egyptians thought they were doing the right thing, but it came at a huge cost, causing their children to be weak and sick. They believed that this was just how it was, that the gods had their reasons. But the cost was real. Many of the royal children died young, and those who lived often had health problems. This practice of incest in the royal family wasn't just about love, it was about power and religion. By marrying within the family, the pharaohs made sure that no other family could claim the throne. It was a way of keeping all the power and all the wealth in one very small circle. The sister wives and daughter wives of the pharaohs weren't just partners. They were also powerful queens and religious leaders in their own right. They played a big role in the ceremonies and rituals of the kingdom, and their high status was seen as a sign of the pharaoh's greatness. The common people, though, didn't follow this rule. In fact, for most Egyptians, marrying a close family member was a terrible thing to do. So what the royal family did was seen as something that only gods could do, a right that only they had. It separated them from the rest of the people and made them seem even more divine. But the royal family's secrets didn't stop at marriage. Some things were even more twisted, more strange, and more hidden from the eyes of the public. They had to do many things to keep their power, to make sure the gods were happy, and to keep the kingdom safe. And sometimes, those things were not just about who they married. They were about magic, dark rituals, and strange beliefs that went far beyond what most people would ever think of doing. He was the link between the people and the gods. He had to do what he had to do to keep the gods happy, even if it meant doing things that would shock and scare us today. He was a man with a great burden and a great power, and his world was full of secrets that the rest of us can only guess at. He was expected to be perfect and to keep the kingdom perfect, and that pressure led to some very strange and very dark places. Ancient Egyptians believed in magic, and they used it for everything. They had spells for good luck, spells to ward off evil spirits, and of course, spells for love. And when it came to love, they didn't mess around. They had what we would call love potions, or love spells that were truly gruesome. Imagine wanting someone to fall in love with you so badly that you would use their hair, fingernails, or even a piece of their clothing in a spell. They thought that by mixing these things with special herbs and chanting magic words, they could bind someone to them forever. The belief was that a piece of a person held their power and their soul. By using a piece of them, you could control them, even their feelings. It was a very powerful and a very scary idea. They would take a piece of a person's body, like a strand of hair or a bit of their nail, and mix it with other magical ingredients. They would write down special words on a small piece of pottery or papyrus and then bury it, or sometimes even put it into a drink for the person to swallow. This was a way of trying to control someone's feelings and make them love you. These spells were not something you took lightly. They were a serious way to interfere with a person's free will. Some of the most shocking recipes for these love spells were found on ancient papyrus scrolls. They talk about mixing things like the blood of a certain bird, ground up bits of plants, and even parts of a dead person. They thought a mummy's power was especially strong, so they would sometimes grind up parts of mummies to use in their spells. The idea was that the power of the dead, who were closer to the gods, would make the spell even more powerful. These spells weren't just about making someone love you. They were often about making them stop loving anyone else. They were meant to be a way to control and possess another person, to tie them to you forever, whether they wanted to be or not. Imagine a young man who wanted a certain woman to love him. He might go to a magician or a wise woman who could tell him a spell. This spell might involve him getting a piece of her hair, and then maybe mixing it with his own blood, and then putting it into a small clay doll. He would then say some magic words over the doll, and he would believe that this doll would make the woman love him. These spells were not just harmless little games. They were a very serious part of their world. People truly believed they worked, and they truly feared them. A person who was bound by a love spell was seen as someone who was controlled by magic, and it was a very scary thing. People would do anything to get the person they wanted, even if it meant using dark and scary magic. The link between sex and magic was very strong in ancient Egypt. Sex was seen as a way to create life, and so it had a very powerful energy. This energy could be used for magic, for good or for bad. People would use magic to help them have children, to make sure their children were born healthy, and to protect themselves and their families. But they also used it to get what they wanted from other people. Some spells were meant to make a person sick, or to make them infertile, so they couldn't have children. These were very dark and scary spells. They were also used to punish people who were unfaithful. If a man thought his wife was cheating on him, he might go to a magician to get a spell to hurt her. The belief was that magic was a way to get what you wanted, even if it was something that was not good. What would you do if magic was your only hope? If you were in love with someone who didn't love you back, and you believed that a simple spell could change their mind, would you do it? Would you use the power of the gods and the dead to get what you wanted, even if it meant doing something that was a little bit scary? The Egyptians lived in a world where this was not just a question, it was a reality. The gods of ancient Egypt were very different from perfect gods in other religions. They acted a lot like people. They could get angry, jealous, or do things that today would seem shocking. One of the strangest things people believed was that gods could turn into animals whenever they wanted. The sun god Ra could become a giant cat. Horus, the sky god, was shown as a falcon. A fierce goddess Sekhmet took the form of a lioness. These weren't just stories to them. People truly believed the gods did this, so animals weren't just animals. No, they were living symbols of the gods. Because of this, animals became part of many strange and sometimes horrific sexual practices meant to copy or please the gods. In some secret rituals, people did sexual acts with animals. This might sound shocking today, but back then, some priests and believers thought it was holy. They believed that by copying what the gods did in the myths, they could gain the gods' power or keep the world in balance. One famous myth tells how the god Seth, who ruled over chaos and storms, turned into an animal and forced himself on another god to show power. Some followers of Seth acted out this story in secret, hoping to take on his strength and wild energy. But that wasn't the only strange practice. Some temples also used animal parts in love and fertility magic. For example, there are records of crocodile fat, ram bones, and parts of bulls being used to make special charms. Women hoping to become pregnant might carry a charm made from the penis bone of a dog or cat, believing it would bring them the power of the gods. Men hoping to be strong or fertile might use animal blood or dried organs in love potions. Sometimes the animals chosen for rituals were raised at the temples themselves. Priests kept sacred cats, birds, and even bulls that were believed to be living images of certain gods. Some animals were chosen because of myths about how gods behaved when they took those forms. If a god was known for passion or fertility when he became an animal, people believed that animal could pass on the same power. The strangest part is that these acts weren't done for fun. The Egyptians thought they were serious magic, a way to keep the gods happy so the Nile would flood. Crops would grow, and people wouldn't starve. To them, the risk of angering the gods by not doing these rituals was greater than the shame of doing them. There is also evidence from ancient writings and warnings carved in temples that some priests and nobles took these acts too far, going beyond what was seen as holy. Even other Egyptians thought these were dark secrets best left unspoken. But because these acts were part of sacred myths, they kept happening, hidden behind temple walls. In the end, these practices show how deeply the Egyptians mixed magic, sex, animals, and religion. To them, it wasn't just about desire. It was about survival, power, and keeping balance in a world where gods could change shape, get angry, and turn life upside down. But even these shocking acts pale in comparison to what came next. There were things that happened in the secret world of the priests and the pharaohs that were even more strange and more scary. These things were not about gaining power from a god. They were about life and death itself. They were about the things that happen when a person dies. In ancient Egypt, death was not the end. It was just the beginning of a new journey. The body was very important. It had to be preserved so the soul could come back to it. This was the job of the embalmers, the people who made the mummies. But what happened when a beautiful young queen died? What happened when her body, which was seen as a divine vessel, was left alone with these men? These were questions that were not talked about, but they were very real. The Egyptians believed that the body of a royal woman was a divine thing, a vessel for the goddess Isis. So when she died, her body was still considered sacred. But what if a person was not so good and not so holy? What if they were tempted by the beauty of the dead body? These were fears that the Egyptians had. The embalmers were a special group of people. They were priests, and they were seen as very important. But they were also human. The Egyptians knew this. They knew that a beautiful woman, even a dead one, could be a temptation. So they came up with a very strange and very dark law. They said that if a beautiful royal woman died, they had to wait 3 or 4 days before they would begin the embalming process. This was a law to stop the embalmers from being alone with a fresh corpse. The idea was that after 3 or 4 days, the body would not be so tempting. It would have started to rot, and it would not be so beautiful. This law was a way of saying that they knew what could happen. They knew that there were some people who would do something very bad, something that was a great shame to the family and to the gods. It was a way of trying to prevent something that they feared. But was it just a fear? Or had it happened before? Is it a rumor or something worse? The myth of Osiris and Isis was used to talk about this. Osiris was killed by his brother Seth, and his body was cut up into pieces. But his wife Isis found all the pieces and put them back together. She then used her magic to bring him back to life for just a little while. They had sex, and she had a son, Horus. This story was a way of talking about how life could come from death, and how sex could be a part of that. But it was also used by some people to justify certain acts. They would say that if Isis could have sex with a dead body, then it wasn't so bad. It was a very dark and a very strange way of thinking. They thought that if it was good enough for a goddess, it was good enough for them. These were the things that were not talked about. They were the secrets that were kept hidden in the back rooms of the temples, in the dark corners of the embalmers' workshops. They were the things that everyone knew, but no one said out loud. But the world of ancient Egypt was also a world of laws and punishments. And when people did things that were seen as bad, they were punished, and sometimes the punishments were very harsh. Adultery, which is when a married person has sex with someone else, was a very serious crime. A woman who cheated on her husband could be killed. A man who cheated on his wife could also be punished very harshly. The punishment was often a public shaming. They would be taken out into the streets, and people would throw things at them and shout bad things at them. It was a way of showing everyone that this was a bad thing to do. The people of Egypt believed that a family was the most important thing, and that to break up a family was a terrible crime against the gods. Homosexuality was also a complicated thing. Sometimes it was tolerated, and sometimes it was not. In some parts of Egypt, and sometimes it was seen as something that was just part of life. In other times, it was seen as a very bad thing. It all depended on who was in power and what they believed. The laws were not always the same everywhere. But when it was seen as a crime, the punishments were very harsh. They would be publicly shamed, and they would lose their place in society. They would be seen as people who were not good, and they would be cast out of the community. The dark side of slavery and concubines was also a part of this world. Pharaohs and rich men would have many wives and concubines. These were women who were not their official wives, but they were there for their pleasure. They had no rights, and they were often treated very badly. It could be bought and sold, and they were seen as property. They had no say in their own lives. This was a very dark part of the world of ancient Egypt. It was a world where a person's life was not their own. A woman could be taken from her family and made to be a concubine, and she had no say in it. It was a very cruel and very unfair system. Was power the greatest aphrodisiac of all? Did the pharaohs and the rich men use their power to get what they wanted no matter what? It seemed so. They had all the power, and they used it to get what they wanted, even if it meant hurting other people. They had the power to make the laws, and they had the power to break them. They were above the rules that everyone else had to follow. But there was another side to ancient Egypt that most people today never hear about. What happened at some of their big festivals. These festivals were not just quiet prayers or temple visits. At certain times of the year, especially during the great festivals for gods like Hathor and Min, the mood changed completely. The people believed that happiness, laughter, and even sexual acts could please the gods and keep the land alive. At these festivals, people gathered in huge crowds near temples, along the river, or in special courtyards. They sang songs, clapped, and played music on small drums and rattles called sistrums. They danced in ways that today might seem bold or even rude, but to them it was holy. Hathor, for example, was called the mistress of love and also the mistress of drunkenness. People believed she loved music, laughter, and pleasure. So during her festivals, drinking lots of beer and wine was part of worship. Men and women got tipsy together, and the rules about proper behavior were relaxed. People flirted openly, hugged, kissed, and sometimes even had sex in the open. It wasn't seen as something bad. Instead, it was thought to copy the joyful love the gods had for each other. They believed that by acting out these stories, they were helping to keep the world in balance and bring new life to the land. One festival was held each year when the Nile began to flood. The Egyptians believed this flood was the river god giving life to the earth. So, they thought it was right to celebrate life and fertility at the same time. Some stories say that couples would sneak into the fields or by the river to be together during this time. This was a way to honor the gods and share in the power of creation. At other times, there were even more direct links between sex and worship. The god Min was the god of male fertility and shone with a tall white crown and an erect penis. His statues were carried through the crowd during festivals. Women would sometimes lift their skirts or dance with bare chests to honor him. This was not seen as shameful, but as a sign of respect for the power of life. Some of the songs sung during these festivals were very playful, even naughty. They joked about love and desire, telling stories about gods and goddesses falling in love or tricking each other. Laughter itself was holy because it chased away sadness and darkness. For a short time, everyone, rich or poor, young or old, could forget daily worries and just celebrate being alive. The Egyptians believed that the gods loved joy and that sadness could offend them. So, smiling, dancing, and even sexual acts became acts of faith. Of course, not everyone took part in the wildest parts of the festival. Some people just watched, danced, or clapped along. But it was common and accepted that some would be more daring, especially after drinking. And as strange as it sounds to us now, this freedom was seen as part of the festival's magic. These festivals were also a time when people hoped for children. Couples who couldn't have a baby might come to the festival to ask the gods for help. They believed that being part of the joyful celebration, or even making love near a temple, could bring good luck and fertility. Sometimes the priests would even act out parts of the gods' love stories as part of sacred plays. These performances could include kissing, touching, or dance moves that clearly showed desire. This wasn't hidden, it was part of the festival, watched by everyone. The temples themselves were decorated with carvings and paintings that showed gods and goddesses together. Sometimes in ways that clearly hinted at love or sex. These images weren't shocking to the Egyptians. They were reminders that love and desire were natural and divine. Over time, some of these customs changed. In later periods, foreign rulers and stricter religious ideas made festivals quieter and more controlled. The oldest traditions remembered a time when joy, laughter, and even sex were ways to talk to the gods. To the Egyptians, these acts weren't dirty or shameful. They were ways to share in the gods' power and show gratitude for life. They believed the gods themselves felt desire and love, so people didn't have to hide these feelings. Instead, they made them part of public life, at least during special days. Even though these customs feel shocking to us now, they show how deeply the Egyptians mixed faith and daily life. Sex wasn't always hidden behind closed doors. It could also be a prayer, a celebration, or even a promise to help keep the world turning. For the people standing in those ancient crowds, the music, the dancing, the laughter, and even the bold acts weren't just for fun. They believed the gods were watching, smiling, and maybe even joining in. And for a little while each year, everyone could forget fear and share in the joy of being alive. These festivals remind us that history isn't always what we expect. Behind the pyramids and golden masks, there were moments when the whole community came together to celebrate life in the most human way possible. But while the crowds danced and laughed under the hot Egyptian sun, some darker rituals stayed hidden, whispered only by priests in secret rooms. Acts so strange they still shock us today. But the Egyptians didn't just celebrate fertility and love in the open, they also looked for it in their dreams, inside the dark, quiet walls of sacred temples. This was called dream incubation. People who wanted children, healing, or answers to love problems would travel to special temples. They might spend the night there sleeping on mats or special stone beds. Before going to sleep, they would pray, offer food or wine, and ask the gods to send them a dream. These weren't just ordinary dreams. The Egyptians believed that in the quiet of the night, the gods could appear to people, sometimes as lovers, husbands, or wives. A woman hoping for a baby might dream of being embraced by a god, or a man might dream of lying with a goddess. Far from being shameful, these dreams were seen as holy gifts, a sign that the gods cared about them and were helping them. In some temples, priests helped people understand what their dreams meant. If someone dreamed of holding hands with a god, it might mean new love or a child on the way. If they dreamed of a kiss, it might mean good health or the healing of a broken heart. The priests would listen carefully and sometimes even give special herbs, amulets, or short prayers to help the dream's promise come true. These dreams could be very vivid. Ancient writings tell us that people felt the gods touch them, speak to them, or even lie beside them in the dream. It wasn't seen as sinful, it was a direct blessing. After all, the gods themselves were known to take human or animal shape to visit people. The most famous places for this were temples to healing gods like Imhotep and Serapis. People came from far away, hoping the gods would visit them in sleep. Some stayed many nights until they had the dream they wanted. The temples were quiet at night, with oil lamps burning and the scent of incense in the air. People lay in rows, each waiting for a private visit from the divine. Sometimes, a person who couldn't have children would come to sleep in the temple. If they dreamed of a god or goddess coming to them in love, it was seen as a promise of fertility. Couples hoping for a baby might sleep there together, hoping to share a dream. In the morning, people would tell the priests what they saw. The priests wrote some dreams down, adding them to temple records so others could see what the gods had promised. These records were kept on stone walls, papyrus scrolls, or small clay tablets. To us today, these sexual dreams might seem strange or private, but to the Egyptians, they were a bridge between humans and the gods. Love, desire, and even passion weren't things to hide from the divine. They were gifts from it. So, while crowds danced and laughed outside during festivals, inside the temple walls, people quietly hoped for a different kind of meeting, one that happened in the secret world of dreams. Throughout this story, we have dropped small hints about secrets that were only discovered on ancient scrolls. We've talked about the pharaohs and their strange ways, their incestuous marriages, and their belief in magic. We've talked about the fear of the embalmers and the punishments for crimes. But there is one secret that is the strangest of all. It is a secret that was only known to the pharaohs and the highest priests. It was a secret that was never written down in the big temples, but was only whispered in the darkest corners of the palace. It is the secret of the pharaoh's darkest secret. The yearly flood of the Nile was the most important event of the year. Without it, the whole kingdom would starve. The pharaoh was the one who was responsible for making sure the flood came. He was the one who had to make sure the gods were happy. He was the link between the people and the gods. So, what did he do to make sure the flood came? Finally, we can reveal the cliffhanger. Some historians and ancient texts suggest that certain pharaohs performed a secret fertility ritual, involving self-pleasure into the Nile each year to ensure the river's flooding. This sounds so strange to us, but to them, it was a very serious and very sacred thing. The pharaoh was seen as the living embodiment of the god Adam, the first god. The myth was that Adam created the world by himself. He used his own body to create all of creation. He made the gods, and he made the world, all by himself. He was the god of creation, and his power was in his semen. The Egyptians believed that the pharaoh, as the living Adam, had the same power. So, each year at the beginning of the flood season, the pharaoh would go to the Nile. He would go alone, or with only the highest priests. He would perform a ritual where he would pleasure himself and release his semen into the river. He believed that by doing this, he was reenacting the creation of the world. He was giving his own divine life force to the river, to make it fertile and to make it bring the flood. He was ensuring the survival of the kingdom with his own body. was shocking, yet it was sacred. It was a way of showing everyone that the pharaoh was the one who was responsible for everything. He was the one who had to do the hard things, the strange things, the things that no one else would do, all for the good of the kingdom. It was a very private and a very strange duty. It was not something that was talked about out in the open. It was a secret that was kept in the heart of the pharaoh and the priests. The pharaoh was the one who had to do this, and he did it because he believed it was his duty. He was the link between the people and the gods. He was the one who had to make sure the gods were happy. He had to make sure that the river was happy. He had to make sure that the flood came. And he did it by using his own body in a way that we would see as very strange and very private. This tells us a lot about power, fear, and belief in ancient Egypt. The pharaoh had all the power, but he was also full of fear. He was afraid that if he didn't do this, the gods would get angry, and the flood would not come. He was afraid that everyone would starve. His belief in the gods was so strong that he would do anything to make sure that they were happy. He would do anything to make sure that the kingdom survived. He was a man with a great burden and a great power, and his world was full of secrets that the rest of us can only guess at. He was expected to be perfect and to keep the kingdom perfect, and that pressure led to some very strange and very dark places. Why do we find this so fascinating? It's because it shows us that history isn't always golden statues and temples. Sometimes it's dark, strange, and deeply human. The people of ancient Egypt were just like us. They had hopes and fears. They had loves and losses. But their world was so different from ours. They lived in a world of magic, of gods, and of strange beliefs. They did things that we would never do. They believed things that we would never believe. They did it all for the same reasons we do things today. To survive, to love, to have a good life. They were just trying to make it through the day, just like us. But they did it in a world that was so full of strange things. They had to deal with the gods, the Nile, and the pharaohs. They had to deal with magic and with death. They had to do things that we would find shocking, but they did it all because they believed it was the right thing to do. They believed it was the only way to keep their world going. This is the real story of ancient Egypt. It's not just golden masks and pretty statues. It's a story of people living in a world full of fear, magic, and strange beliefs. A world so different from ours, yet somehow still the same. They did shocking things, all because they thought it would help them survive. If you were a pharaoh, would you do the same to protect your kingdom? You may never know. But these secrets of the past are always waiting to be found. And while they're not always beautiful, they're always human. If you liked this journey into the dark side of ancient Egypt, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. And tell us in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? Which part of this story surprised you the most? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.